Hello, everyone. This is Cherie Burton. Welcome to Women Seeking Wholeness Wednesday. As I always like to say, if you're not sick of me saying it by now, my biggest and greatest passion is helping women to connect to who they truly are. So this is a podcast for women who long to feel, express, and be who they truly are. And there's no one else to be but you, so you might as well be you all the way. Now, today is a great episode, and it's got the feel goods. It might sound a little bit triggering if you've lost somebody or if you're in a grief episode, but also extremely healing and validating in knowing that you really don't ever disconnect from those you've lost. Erin has some really great ways to connect in and to find peace amidst soul-crushing loss. She has lost a daughter, and she will talk about that. She's written 2 books, and she was just delightful and insightful to talk to. And the Stand, Speak, Shine School is still in full swing for registrations. We have 1 week left until we launch. So go to standspeakshine.com. We're going to be talking about abundance, radiance, and connection. Connection being one of the flagship conversation topics that we're exploring in today's episode. But what I also mean by connection is connecting in with yourself, your own divine soul, which is a direct connection to source or to God or to the divine, however you define that. And that is where you really show up in this world as a force, as an influencer, as a loving vessel that heals, connects, blesses, and presences her light wherever she goes. Higher frequency way of being. So this is a 3-month self-actualization program for women. I'm closing off registration on our first day, January 30th. So make sure you go to standspeakshine.com and check that out. And also keep up with our Facebook group, Women Seeking Wholeness. Ask to join that because we are going to continue with our weekly Facebook Lives. We're going to continue conversations around what we introduce in these episodes, and it's going to be an epic year all the way around. Erin, thank you for your willingness to dive into such a difficult and powerful and vulnerable topic. I mean, you've already dove into it by writing about it. And I know you do a lot of bereavement work and you're a coach, a bereavement coach. I think for our listeners who haven't had the opportunity to really climb into what you do, share with us your story and your loss and how it led you into the space you're in now to help others.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me here to talk about a topic that is kind of a taboo thing that people don't always talk about. Mm-hmm. So this all began in 2010. I had a baby girl. Her name was Ava, and she was a cardiac patient at a children's hospital. So she, from day one, had heart surgery, which was successful. And after the success of that surgery, there was a number of other things happening, blood clots, things like that. We took her home after 10 days, being in the hospital, a 10-day-old baby, and really tried to take care of her at home. And everything looked great. And the worst possible thing happened that was totally unexpected. The one day she just, felt cold. She was crying. She didn't want to eat. I went through the process of contacting the children's hospital, and they said everything would be fine. Just hop into the local hospital and they'll just check her out. And, I went into the local hospital and it was chaos broke out is essentially what happened there. And the result of all of that chaos is she passed away. It was totally sudden, unexpected. 12 hours prior to that, they said everything seemed like it was totally fine. No one had any concerns. Her heart was working perfectly well. That wasn't the cause of it. It was unexplainable. So that really rocked my world. So rocked is probably the nicest word I can use, Cherie. I think it's more along the lines of, it's almost like everything suddenly doesn't make sense. So when we talk about grief and we talk about loss, we think, oh, they lost, this person, this child. The reality of it is you don't just lose that person. You lose so many things that come after that. And with it, you lose entire futures. You lose everything that you think your life will be, their life will be. You lose their grandchildren. You lose them graduating, their first day of school, wherever that happens on the spectrum. It's like a total, utter, and complete loss, and life doesn't make sense. And unfortunately for me, and I know that this is an issue for a lot of people in grief, is there's this taboo and stigma associated with people not wanting to talk about it because they're afraid they're going to make you feel worse. They're afraid they're going to say the wrong thing. Or they do the opposite, which is positive invalidation. They're in a better place. So not that they're not in a better place, I'm sure. But the concept is that really doesn't matter because I want my child here with me in the whole life that we had planned to live. So it was really a combination for me of nobody would talk to me about my daughter, which ultimately says she didn't matter. It didn't exist. It didn't happen. It doesn't matter. So there was nowhere to discuss that and voice my feelings. And when I did, I was met with the positive invalidation. Well, be thankful for your other children. Well, I was thankful for my other children, but that doesn't assess the fact that one of them is missing. So it was just never safe to actually talk about that loss and the grief of my daughter, because nobody was willing to sit in that space and talk about it. It was always the elephant in the room. And, one thing I learned with grief, I had really not lost anyone in my life. This was my first loss, and it was my daughter. And I had no faculties, no teachings, no one around me had any concept of what to do. So it's like you're drowning and nobody can help you. And because they can't help you, it's like they don't say anything. So it really doubles up for a lot of people when you're talking about grief and when it's something like a child, because, I'll never forget the one time that this lady, she was in the school playground. I have an older daughter. She was 6 at the time. And I had Ava was born in the summer, and everybody knew I was pregnant and excited. And when I went back to school in September, I was met that first day with everybody saying, "Oh, where's your baby? How's the baby? How is everything?" So it was like person after person. I'm having to say, she died over and over and over on that first day of school. And that's what happens. But the thing is instead of somebody saying, "Oh my gosh, what happened? How can I help you? Do you need to talk about it?" It was like they leaned out. When people lean in or they lean out, that's what it's like. So it was like people physically recoiled as if it was contagious, as if I think about that, it's going to happen, that whole concept of it. Or if this comes into my world, that forces me to question everything else in my life. And nobody wants to go there. We all want the happy, right? And unfortunately, happy is only one part of the whole. And everybody dies at some point, whether it's at 1 day old or whether it's at 100 years old. It is inevitable, but it's the one thing nobody wants to talk about. So to make a long story short, over a period of 7 years, I just went deeper and deeper into complete isolation and darkness. My spouse, he was not able to deal with his grief either. That manifested in other ways for him. It was a total collapse of our relationship after 7 years. I wasn't able to parent my daughter very well because they say children actually lose the most because they don't just lose their sibling, they also lose their parent.
Interesting.
Yeah. And, looking back at this now, because it's always, looking forward or in the moment, I didn't see it. But looking back, I can see how my inability to show up emotionally, because there was nowhere for me to vent or display or work through my grief, that affected her. And it wasn't until 7 years later, when I had a full mental breakdown, loss of health, loss of relationship, that I started processing it, that my daughter was actually able to talk about it. So she took my cues in grief, both the good and the bad.
Interesting. What came to mind as I've been listening to you, and I walked a very parallel experience, which I'll share in a moment, but it's not that people are they want to help, right? They have the heart to, like, it's so awkward, and I don't want to say the
Yes.
wrong thing. So it's easier just to not say anything. And then as the one grieving, you feel so dismissed. I think the biggest fear is you just don't want the earth and its inhabitants to forget about this child. And the more it's not talked about, the more it's not discussed, it heightens your grief, because this was so real to you, and you just have this huge, massive fear of this beautiful soul kind of just being looked over, looked past, not discussed, not honored. Especially after, I think after funerals, or I think people have an expectation of when you think it's still not okay to talk about it, even years after the fact. How have you, so backtracking just a bit, so did you and your husband end up getting a divorce?
Yes. So it all culminated in honestly, Cherie, it all culminated in 2016. So just on the cusp of 16, 17, I, by accident, discovered that he was having multiple affairs. And, the reality is he never dealt with his grief. And maybe that's part of his journey and who he is. But I also feel like that was a way to escape the numbness and the darkness of grief when it has nowhere to go, because it just sits in you. So that ultimately, yes, it ended up, I ended that relationship moving forward. And that was the best thing for both of us. And that's a common thing for bereaved parents. I've seen it go both ways.
Yes, I have too. It can make or break. And honestly, if that numbness is worse than deep sadness for a lot of people, and the numb feeling is so benign and such a way just to exist and survive, that it's almost like you would rather they at least completely have a nervous breakdown, as opposed to just becoming numb in it, not even addressing the actual pain. So I have seen that numbness kills relationships. It kills the relationship to yourself, to your relationship to God, and especially the relationship that you have to those closest to you. But you did have another daughter. How old was she when you lost Ava?
She had just turned 6. When she was very excited about her. She was totally oblivious to the fact that that her sister had heart surgery. It was like, oh, that's nothing, Mom. Don't worry about it. She was very much in the moment. And, that's some of the things I look back. I know I did the best I could with little to no tools. Yeah. But, there's always that knowing that was part of the experience.
Yes. And that will shape her life in ways she
totally
will not even know about until many years down the road. But okay, so you decided to write. You decided to put your feelings into written form, and you created a book called Love You, Ava Baby. When did that materialize?
So that actually materialized probably about, I want to say 7 or 8 months after I left my spouse, because that was the point of mental breakdown. I had gotten to the point where I had decided I didn't want to be alive anymore. And I made a conscious decision that I just couldn't do it anymore. I was very sick. I couldn't work. I couldn't parent my kids. I couldn't do anything. I had a spouse that didn't love me. My whole life was a lie. One of my children was dead. What had I done wrong to deserve all of these things that felt like a punishment? So when I made that decision, Cherie, like I consciously went out into the woods. I didn't put this in my book, but I consciously went out into the woods and stood there in the middle of the forest and said, I give up. Like, I just can't live like this. And I think the whole concept of, the loss is not the worst part. It's when a piece of you has died and you have to continue on living. That is the biggest travesty of life. It really is. And it's, that a lot of bereaved parents, that's how they live, is you are literally have to go on one step in front of the other when the old you is everything you thought is dead. And a piece of you leaves with your child. Like, there's no way around that. So when I went out into the woods and I wholeheartedly, with my heart and soul, had decided I really couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't wake up every morning in such bleak emptiness. And, Cherie, this was making that decision and surrendering to that allowed a whole other world to show up, a lot of miracles, a lot of shock and awe. 2 days after that happened, a woman contacted me through Messenger, and I know her. She's a part of the extended family, and I hadn't spoken to her in years, and we didn't really have any kind of rapport. And she sent me a message saying, your daughter Ava is coming to me crying. They're saying that you gave up. So here I was 2 days prior to this, standing in the middle of the forest at 5 a.m. with not a soul around me, saying exactly those words in my soul, screaming out, I give up. I finally decided I couldn't do it.
I remember reading that in your book, and I was just like, oh my gosh. That is, there's things that happen that cannot just be coincidences, right? And
exactly. No such thing as coincidence.
Yeah. And I have heard different, I'm just going to insert a little thing here. So when I was waiting for these last two children to come to our home, I thought I was going to birth them. I knew they were coming. I'd seen them in a vision. It was Eli and Emma. They looked just like my bio kids. And I was so grieved that they weren't here yet, that I was missing the spiritual inklings and messages that I think they were trying to come through. So I had a very similar thing happen where I was on the phone with a woman who'd written books on unborn souls. Her name's Sarah Hines, and she's a dear friend to this day. But while I was talking to her on the phone, she got really silent, and she said, Cherie, he's here in my kitchen, standing here. And she couldn't make out everything about him other than that he had blue eyes and he was very strong built, built strong, like a strong man, young man. And she's like, he's trying to say that he's been trying to come through for you, but you won't listen. And I was like, what? He ended up being born 3 years after that. So it still took a while, but true to form, I have this blue-eyed, he's 7 now. But it just, as I was reading that in your book and just even hearing you say it, there are some things that happen that you cannot chalk up to coincidence. That the universe, God, guiding angels, whatever we want to call that, and you and I are going to define that a little bit here, what we believe. But there's such a divinely subscribed or prescribed path for each soul. And they teach the waiting or the bereaved parent in ways that they come through, they try to come through, whether they haven't been born yet or they've passed away and now they're a spirit on the other side. Those synchronicities that happen are not happenstance. They serve a very, like, you had to be on the earth, right? That had to come through really strong for you. So you would stay here and do the work. And I found that I was at the breaking point where I was ready to just not worry about these two children. And that's when he had to come through another person to get to me, because I was ready to give up. So yeah, when we don't connect and listen, that's when things, if it's part of their path and ours, that's when things will start to really move and miracles will start to happen. So I want to say that, because we always think miracles happen according to our faith, and that is a divine truth.
Yeah.
But sometimes they happen through grace because we suck at listening, or we're so in our head, or we're so in pain that we literally don't have the wherewithal to drum up the faith necessary to keep on going. And
you're right. And that's one of the pieces of it, Cherie, like listening. It's true, where everybody says, oh, be in the moment and be in the moment. Well, the reality is, we live here on this thing. We do have to think about things in the future. We do have to consider things in the past, to reflect on them, to learn and grow from them. But you're right, when it comes to spirit and those divinely guided messages, and it's orchestrated, right, in many ways, in many forms, and it's dismissed because you can't explain it. But the truth is, they're all like indicators. They're part of our intuitive guidance system and our compass, and where that's leading us. And if we listen, there's a sense of feeling total support and love. And when you don't listen, it's because you're in that pain. You're in that thing of living in the future or living in the past. And both are illusions, really, when you think about it.
Yes,
but listen today.
Right. And the pivotal piece of that connection is recognizing those illusions and recognizing that all you have is right now. And so this woman had this message from Ava, and then it started to just kind of open up more for you. And you realized, oh my goodness, I'm not alone here. She hasn't really left. How did that like kind of metamorphosize for you? I don't know the word, metamorphosize.
Yeah, no, that works. It's like the butterfly transformation. So, it's still, even now when I think about it, I think, really, is this how this all happened? So it's kind of along the concepts of, we all have this expectation of, we deal with something and then it's gone, or it's over, or I've moved on from it. But it's really the concept of, you don't go from 1 to 10 and then you move on to the next thing. There's all those other steps in between, 2 through 9, that allows you to build and learn and grow. So this has been the most expansive. I could not have ever fathomed that today I would be sitting here on a podcast with you, Cherie, talking about the fact that I learned how to listen. And that's why that piece is so key. Listen to my daughter's guidance, her thoughts, her directions to me, and then have it metamorphosize into other people's children. And that's what I do with them. Their children talk to me and tell me, what is it about their parents' life that they need to know, need to look at, need to explore? What's the belief that they have to shift? And, oftentimes it's shocking, because how could I possibly have known that that was the thing that they needed to shift? Well, I didn't know. Their kids know, and I'm just listening and voicing it through. So it was a slow process. I'm not going to lie, Cherie. And it was painful, because I had to learn what didn't work. And unfortunately, sometimes I think I learned the hard way, in the sense that it was like banging my head against the wall. This isn't working. This isn't working. And I would get something and then it would be gone. And then there's the whole concept of, feeling like you're crazy. When I had my mental breakdown, the only reason that I went to see a psychotherapist was because Ava had this woman, Jade is her name, write me a love letter from her. And in this love letter, she said, you need to go see a psychologist. You'll feel so much better. Well, Cherie, can you imagine? I've just had a mental breakdown. I've lost everything. I've lost my house, my spouse, everything. I'm at the bottom of the bottom, and I've decided that I want to die. And P.S., I'm showing up here because my dead daughter is telling me to come see you. What would her response have been as a psychotherapist? This woman's totally gone off the deep end. So during that process, I'm working with a psychologist working through the trauma and the grief. And at the same time, I'm working through the process of processing with spirit all of the things that never get said and light doesn't get shone on because it's too dark. So it was like I was doing two processes at the same time, but I could never tell my therapist the other half of it. So it was like I went through therapy with this huge healing piece that I couldn't share. And I couldn't share it for fear of other people's perceptions and beliefs and discrediting, because discrediting and dismissing is what we do. It's what we're taught to do when it's something that's not tangible, provable in physical form.
Yes.
So it was interesting going through that whole process. At the end of it, my therapist had said to me after a year with her, she says, you've made unbelievable strides in coming full circle and really moving through a lot of things. And the reality is if I didn't have my daughter there guiding me and telling me, comforting me, knowing that I was supported, being the light in the dark, being super specific about things, I never would have made it that far. When I say, it's hard to say to other bereaved parents that you can be happy, because the reality is, Cherie, the message that we actually get in the bereaved parents group is that you're never going to get over it. Like literally, I haven't told many people this. There was this one group of bereaved parents, and one of the women on there said, I really need help. Can somebody help me? Let me know what I can do because I'm sinking. And for me, it was like, I know that's sinking and I know you're reaching out. And if nobody offers you help, you will dismiss it as if you don't deserve it and you shouldn't bother. So I offered my help publicly and said, reach out to me if you want to. I'm happy to listen. If I can help, I'll help. And one of the moderators actually deleted my comment. And the next comment underneath it was, don't bother going to see a psychologist or a psychotherapist because you will feel like this for the rest of your life. So she deleted my comment and told me I was not allowed to offer help. And the woman who told her not to bother getting help was the one that was left on there. And that's it's unfortunate because as a bereaved parent, they're perpetuating based on their own experience because that was their experience. So it's really hard to be at the bottom of the bottom in that kind of loss and darkness and grief. And instead of having people holding space for you and giving you hope, they actually take away any glimmer of hope and keep you down in it. And that's not their intention. They're just relaying their own experience. But it's kind of like, no wonder the suicide rate is so high for bereaved parents. The illness rate is extremely high, divorce rate through the roof. It's not surprising. I'm surprised those levels and percentages aren't more, considering the lack of support, compassion, understanding. And, the reality is a lot of people don't want to talk about spiritual stuff in that context.
How were you raised, or what were your beliefs before you lost Ava? What were your beliefs about what happens after we die and how that connection can still happen or not happen with those we loved and have lost?
Yes. Right. So I was raised Presbyterian. And it was always under the concept of heaven and hell, God, heaven and hell, under that religious basis and concept of hierarchy and processing. So basically based on the Bible, I guess you could say. So that kind of, for me, we weren't devout by any means. We were more along the lines of, we would try and go on Sundays, and if we're good people, we'll go on Christmas and all of those things. But the reality is that's heavily publicized and taught to us, not just in the religious sector, but that also showed up in our educational sector, within our in places of employment, within expectations. It's a common thread in Western society. That is a really big basis for a lot of people. So for my family, we weren't 2 feet in, but we also weren't completely out of it. So I always just went along with the concepts as a kid. But the one thing that I always wondered in the back of my mind was, if God loves everybody and forgives everybody, why is there a heaven and a hell? Like, it just didn't make sense. That doesn't make sense at all. Because if he loves everybody and he forgives all, then there wouldn't be a hell, because that's a punishment. So it was always kind of, I went along with it, but it never really made sense. Coming full circle, the concept of death, like in Western society, is, it's like the equivalent of the end, loss, hardship, sorrow, darkness. It's all related to bad things that feel bad, labels that are bad. And then that brings up that religious piece of, well, does that mean that they went to hell because they did something bad, and this happened because I did something bad? I made a decision that doesn't really go along with the church. Is this my punishment, this suffering for this happening? That's really what that lends to. And that's what a lot of people live in, is feeling in some way punished, or feeling that they don't know where their loved one went, when the fact is, Cherie, is if you look at a human being, so here I am, I'm a standing human being, but I'm not just the physical, tangible things. Yes, I'm muscle and bone and blood and all of those things. But what about the emotions that you cannot see and doesn't have a physical form? What about the mind and the thoughts that I'm thinking that you couldn't possibly know that I'm thinking? And what about the spirit and the soul and the things that I cannot explain, the synchronicities and the intuitions? Where does it leave all of that? That's our spirit. That's inherently part of our spirit and our human being. So for somebody to say, when your body dies, that means your spirit dies, it's kind of like, well, that means I'm just going to die, and all of this means nothing. Because why would it? You're just here and then it's done.
Live, so eat, drink, and be merry, right?
Right. Yeah. But for most of us, we need to know there's a purpose and there's a reason, especially when we all, at some point in our lives, endure suffering, regardless of what the circumstance is. There has to be purpose and meaning behind it in order for us to transcend it. So in terms of death, I had to know that there was not only a purpose behind her death, but there was meaning to this life further as a result of it. And I also needed to know that she was not gone forever. Mm-hmm. And that's what was shown to me, right? Somebody showing up and saying, your daughter's crying to me, it's telling me something I just thought in my head, is, I think pretty good, valid proof. And at the end of the day, I really don't care if people believe that or not. That's what happened. And that totally changed my perception of death. We don't really die because spirit can't. Your spirit is an innate part of the universe, soul, part of God. When we say children of God, you're basically a spirit of God, and God is within you, and you are within God, and you don't die. Mm-hmm. In the sense that we traditionally look at it, because we look at it as the physical form.
Right.
But unfortunately for us in Western society, we take it as the whole form.
Yeah. And I think I would say most of the people listening to this program are totally lined up with, hey, we have a soul, we have a spirit. I think mm-hmm. until you've gone through such an incredibly painful loss, you start to question what you believe, what you have been told, what you were, I guess, programmed with about life after death. And then I know I've heard many variations of this, right? I've heard parents say to me that have lost a child, I've had two very, very close friends lose young children. One of them, my friend Kimberly, lost her son in a drowning accident when they were on a boat with their family, and he was 6 years old, I think. And I think, it's been enough time now. I'd love to revisit the conversation with her, but her son felt very far away. She had this expectation that she would feel him more. And then I've had others say that they just were enveloped or could feel a lot more. And then it would go years and nothing. So I think, I really do think it's the attunement and the connection. And it's also for our learning My experience of losing a child is very different than yours. I talked to you about this earlier, but I placed a baby girl for adoption when she was 5 days old, and I had made the adoption plan in my pregnancy, and I was in my mid-20s, and the father had, basically abandoned. And so was faced with a really difficult decision. I had 1 year of school and college left. A lot of my listeners know this, a lot of them don't. But it was actually a very soul ripping but sacred experience. It was I learned about love and sacrifice at that age like nothing else. I knew which family she was going to. And it has ended up being a very, very open adoption. And she's actually the age now that I was when I had her. And she has 2 beautiful young boys, Zeke. And so anyway, I forgot to mention the other guy, Tucker and Zeke, and their ages 2 and baby. So when I was going through the worst of it, actually, she came through for me in my pregnancy and guided me to the decision to place her and where she wanted to go, which family she wanted to go to. I always reflected on that. But then I was empty after because I had no child to bury. I had no child to come in an angel form and whisper in my ear if she was just gone. She was with another mother forever. But what's been beautiful about my grief process through all of that, because it was a very messy grief process. And I actually met my husband when she was only 3 months old, and we had another child after we were married 6 months, I was 6 months pregnant. Or no, sorry. After we married 1 year, I was 6 months pregnant with our son, Noah. Right. So there's only 2.5 years between the child I placed for adoption, Wendy, and him. But I remember when I had him, it brought I was pregnant with him, it brought all of the grief back. And then here she is 25, and you say, hey, you never get over it. It's true. But what happens over time is you go through that grief cycle and you come to the acceptance part. The pain isn't as strong, but it doesn't mean that you won't cycle through more pain. It just means that the emotional charge of that pain is greatly lessened. And now you have the wisdom gained through experience. And now you have compassion that you would have never had. Like I find out, I used to think that girls who got pregnant out of wedlock, I went into judgment. And also I had judgment around girls that placed their babies for adoption. Now all I feel is absolute depth of compassion for those women and the choices that they're faced with. Now, you losing a child through having, this heart problem, and so suddenly, and you had no preparation and it just came, and then you were just, basically got pummeled through grief and coming on the other side of it. And it's been how many years now? 7, 8?
Almost 10.
Almost 10 now. Okay. So 7 years of the deep pain, and then kind of 3 years of the recovery around that, right? Having the space around that. By the way, pain does come in 7-year cycles. And a lot of people who cycle through the dark night of the soul, it's usually about 7 years. I don't want that to scare anyone with that, but I just had that aha very recently.
Yes.
But here's the thing, when we're talking about connection, because connection is the pinnacle aspect of healing for anything, whether it's healing an addiction, healing depression. When you were talking about healing grief or completing a grief cycle, I think the aha everyone has to come to, and I love that you really illustrate it well, is that it was about connection. It's about connecting with spirit. So the reason I asked you about your religious upbringing is because everyone has their own set of beliefs, whether they went to church or didn't, whether they just learned about it watching movies or TV, about, contact with spirits from the other side, those we love, and what kind of role they play in our lives ongoing. It took you learning about connecting to spirit for you to really not just read about it or hear about it or have the old beliefs with religious stuff, but you actually are now this living embodiment of a woman who has claimed her own knowing about that. Mm-hmm. So how did that morph for you? Like, Because I know you have this, you have these two books now, because your first book was about losing Ava. And what is the name of the second book that's being released?
Yes. So the second book is entitled The Spirit Connection, and it's the bereaved parent's guide to moving beyond the grief and communing with your child. So basically, it's part of the process that I went to learn how to connect with their children in spirit. And that was kind of how it morphed. The first book is just the story. I had no idea it would turn into me being able to communicate not just with her, but with anyone else. So that process of what that looks like is a layering. One of the things that you were talking about earlier, just to touch back on that, when you were saying how in people that you know that have lost children, and the things that people say is, oh, I got a connection at first, but then there was nothing, or I thought I would feel them stronger. It's often about listening is a piece and being open to listening, but it's about making space for them to show you how they're showing up for you. Because we have this preconception of what we think it looks like, feels like, sounds like, all of those things. But it's not really what our expectations are. And I think that's the hardest part. We're all looking for tangible proof or something. It's almost like, when I hear spirit, Ava, my grandmother, anybody, I struggled with it because I felt like I should be hearing it outside of me, like you and I are talking, like a total conversation with a different voice. Mm-hmm. But that's not how it shows up for me. It shows up for some people that way. But for me, it's within my mind that the conversations with spirit take place. So there are thoughts that are popping in. So I'm hearing within my mind what they have to say. I'm feeling the emotion that goes with it. And I'm seeing them in my mind at the same time. So in order to get to there, at first it started out with, I just wanted to see signs. So that was like the baseline, right? Oh, I got this sign and I just knew it was from Ava. Those were the things I lived on at first, because it wasn't like, oh, she's here with me in spirit and I can connect with her. It was, oh, she's giving me a sign that she's somewhere. That's how it felt like at first. And those are important because they give us hope and they make us feel not alone. And they let us know that they're not gone forever. So most people stop there, Cherie, at the signs, feeling like they're sending me a sign, because our minds and things that we're taught, that's really where it limits us. That's a limitation that we've put on ourselves, that society has put on us in general. And we just stop there. We don't question it. We don't take it further because nobody really has ever definitively, prescribed exactly what death is and proved it to a fault. Nobody has. I'm not here to do that either. I'm simply here to share that experience and what I've learned and what it looked like for me and how it can help others. So that whole piece of starting with signs, the woman, Jade, that came to me at first, she spent a year working with me, giving me messages. She let me know that for her, it did sound like my daughter was outside of her. And that's why I held on to this concept of that's how it should be for me. So most people, when they try and learn stuff, they start with little things like meditations, usually allows you to make space. But it's often our expectations and our trying so hard to get something that actually is the barrier. Because you're a spirit and you want to connect with spirit, you're born with that. You can't not have it. But life and all the things you're taught you should be and shouldn't be, and what this is and what this isn't, and all the times you're dismissed for your, make-believe friend and your knowing of things and all that, all those dismissals layer on top of us. So when you want to get connecting with spirit, you have to really explore and examine all those things that are those layers that are sitting on top, because they're all barriers. So I don't know if I'm sure you've been to see a medium at some point. It's kind of like a lot of bereaved parents go in to see a medium. And in their mind, they're like, okay, I only know this is real if they tell me this one thing that they could never know. So they're walking into these situations desperately wanting to believe but automatically dismissing and discrediting anything they're going to get because it doesn't look exactly like they think it should. And that's a problem, because how are they ever going to connect within themselves if they do not they don't allow it to show up the way it's supposed to be? So part of the process is making space, is what I call it. Spirit, I can't listen to spirit if I'm constantly thinking, constantly worrying, constantly having expectations, constantly in the past, constantly in the future. How could I possibly listen? My mind is going round and round on the hamster wheel. So part of the process that I went through myself, really directed by Spirit and Ava, and that's what she does with my clients too. She tells me, or their kids tell me what they need to do, and then they do it, and lo and behold, there's a shift. Part of that is making space, which means going to that dark place or that thing that you don't want to acknowledge or go to, and actually allowing yourself and giving yourself permission to feel all of it and do all of it. A lot of people, it's discredited, and oftentimes it seems like it's so silly, but I have personally witnessed people's lives shifting because of just doing this one thing. And it's super simple, and anybody can do it at any time. So basically you would just sit down. So for me, I'll give you an example, so it's a little bit more tangible for everybody listening. One of the things that happened on my journey was one of the detectives, after Ava passed away, we were really put on it was more along the lines of they interrogated us. We were removed from our homes, crime scene tape put up at our house. The police officer told our neighbors it was a crime scene, a homicide, like the whole nine. Things just happened the way they should never happen when somebody's child has died. And so when all these red flags started popping up, like, that's not right, that doesn't add up, that doctor's saying the complete opposite of what happened, it really, it was like all these red flags were up and I couldn't move past it. So I went into the police station and said, I've got all these red flags, and I flopped down my file folder on the table. It made a big bang, and it's a huge file of all our medical files, all these other things, all these facts that don't add up to what has occurred and what they're telling me. And, he laughed in my face and said, "Oh, are you making a scrapbook?" And that statement, when I'm asking you if you've investigated my daughter's death, it's just happened. And it's amusing to you that I would want to know that she's there. That experience, that moment, totally, it didn't just crush me. From that I took, I have absolutely no value. My life has no value. My daughter's life has no value. And all the things that are in place to help me to bring justice and truth and understanding don't exist because of this statement that this person made. So what I did with that is I held on to that for 7 years, and it shaped and molded my inability to deal with grief and to function in many ways. My way of processing through that was actually writing a letter to that police officer saying all the things that we shouldn't say about human beings, saying all the things I felt. I wrote furiously with tears streaming down my face. There was absolutely no apology for anything I said, thought, felt. Any blame I put on him, I just let it all out. And that's the purpose of this, is allowing yourself to go there, because we often are like, I shouldn't feel that way, or I should have compassion, or maybe it wasn't what I thought it was. That stuff does not matter when you're acknowledging your own experience and your feelings. It really is about giving yourself permission to do that. And very, very few of us do that. Being able to do that and then burning it with the focused intention that I could let it go and I didn't need him, and that was no longer going to be part of what holds me back, and I was giving the hurt back to spirit. That process of doing that was gone. 7 years of that, and all of a sudden when I finally allowed myself to fully be in that, and with the intention of fully being in it without apology and then letting it go, it was gone. That's all that was required. The thing that we don't want to do, nobody wants to be in pain. Nobody wants to go to the things that hurt, but that's the way out. So, that is one of the things I take my clients through. And for everybody, it looks different because everybody has a different thing. And sometimes it's layers. Sometimes some people need 5 layers when they've had a not great childhood with their parents. There's a lot of letters that get written and a lot of layers. But, my one client, like, here's a perfect example of how something that seems so silly and so simple and really would not have any effect. She wrote a letter to her daughter, who she does not have a great relationship with, her living daughter, saying all the things she felt as a parent, all the hurts, all the blame, all the shame, all the things she wish she did differently, her regrets, but her anger as well at how she was being treated. When she did that, within days, her daughter called her up. She hadn't told her daughter she did this. The letters are just for you, not to be mailed out. Her daughter called her within a few days with a complete shift in attitude, this sudden respect out of nowhere. So it was like the energetic release of all that she was holding on to within her rippled. It energetically releases the people that we have it with, and totally shifted. Her daughter wanted to see her. She wanted to talk with her. She wanted to get together with her so she could see her grandchildren. All from a letter that she didn't even know was written. So it seems simple and trivial, but my friend, it is so powerful. And I never would have believed it was that powerful without experiencing it myself. And then watching other people have the same experience when they do it with focused intention and without apology. So that's what I call making space.
Yeah. So that is really powerful. I like how you also talked about bringing the visual in. As many senses that in my experience with emotional healing processing and meditation, the more sensory, well, it's not necessarily meditation because that's its whole other art and science, but the more sensory enriched portals you can open, like the more sensory portals you can open through enriching, and what you're seeing in your mind's eye is a sensory portal. It's not necessarily what you're looking at, it's what you're seeing in your mind's eye. So you open up portals in your being through focused intention with that sense. What you're smelling, what you're seeing in your mind's eye, what you're feeling, touching. I remember when I was grieving Wendy, the daughter that I placed, I went to my grandmother's after I placed her, and my mom was there the whole time. And so they just gave me the guest bedroom. And I remember I had her like hospital blanket. I don't know if you did anything similar to this, but I would just smell her on that. And then I was like holding her little bracelet that she got at the hospital. So I just had these like little talismans or these little reminders that was something physical and tangible. And then eventually that wears off. But just the immediate, what can I touch? What can I smell? I'm a huge fan of essential oils, and I believe that they are great facilitators for opening up the limbic area of the brain and stored memory, and for the smell factor. And then just seeing what you want to see, or bringing that soul in through pictures. I've had people do a meditation with a loved one with just their picture sitting there. So they can look in their eyes and it's a physical thing. I've had other people, you could even say that people who really want to connect to the divine, whether it's God or Christ or an angel, or everybody has their own beliefs around that they would find an image that resonated for them of the divine, and then bring that into that focused intention or that meditation or that stillness point where they could just go within and have something there. So anyway, I just wanted to insert that because I love everything you're saying about the focused intention. I feel like that is different than telling someone, okay, just clear your mind of all thoughts.
Right.
This is what we're told to do with meditation. And it's like, that is impossible to do. But when you have an intention, when you have a purpose behind it, you can receive so much just by opening yourself without, and I think you even used the word like releasing the expectation of like having a sign or some lightning bolt experience. It usually isn't the way the spirit realm works. It's very subtle.
Right.
And even as I'm
It is
training
very
people to
subtle.
go, yeah, even as I'm training people to go within themselves and hear their own soul voice, it's very distinctive than all the other voices that pine for us. And that is actually very subtle. Your personality is not subtle,
It is.
but your soul voice is. And it takes in training you to go within and really listen and hear that. So what was, and I know you want, and I want to kind of wrap it up with some final thoughts about the religious wounding that can take place, because this is something that I'm really bringing into the space more to talk about more with women, because we are so sensitive and we can be given something as a truth that isn't necessarily a truth, and it can wound us and keep us from receiving more. Especially as I was talking about, here you are, Erin, this mother who's lost a child, and your own lived experience with that is so sacred to you. And it's not like you got to go to somebody else and be like, is this okay? Like, is this all right that we do that as women, we tend to second guess.
Yes.
So how did you just own that? Like,
Yes.
how did you just be like write this book and this beautiful work, and now you're helping other women and men, of course, connect to that? What was the shift there without just having to defer your own knowing to someone else?
So the shift was actually a slow process. I wish I could tell you it was like, oh, I just decided. No, I didn't work that way.
It never
and
is.
Most people don't. Yeah. So I feel like the reason that we look for validation outside of us is partially tied into that religious wounding piece, but also just the expectations put onto us in general everyday life, because we're always trying to meet the bar of the box, to be in this box, when the reality is we're all very unique human beings. There is no one in the world that looks like me, thinks like me, has had my exact experience or my upbringing. I'm the only person, and the same of you, and the same of everybody else. So what's the deal with this box that we all have to fit into? Because we will never fit into it, and we think we're supposed to fit into it. So that leads us to not trust ourselves and not go within, because we're looking externally because we think there's this box we're supposed to be fitting into, because we've been trying to fit into this box since the get-go, our whole lives. So that piece of fitting into a box that's supposedly made for everyone, but really, rather than it being inclusive, it's totally exclusive. Each person has their own box. And, for me, in this process of owning the fact that I no longer have to get validation from anybody else was a slow and arduous process. At first I did need validation from other people. For me, I was a giver, and it was not okay for me to ask for something. And if I did, there was guilt and shame associated with it, especially in the role of a mother as well, right? Mm-hmm. We're very much taught to be all, and your children are a reflection of who you are. And if they're not perfect, well, you should be ashamed because it's something you did wrong. So all of those things, when you compile them all together, along with the rules and regulations that are put out there in terms of that religious concept of God, Ava really broke that down for me. So when you tap into guidance and you're willing to allow whatever to come in, the things that show up are so profound, Cherie, and they have such clarity, such unconditional love. And, it's the experience of it, but you have to allow yourself to have no expectations to allow that experience in, because we don't know what it looks like. All we know is that stinking box that everybody told us to fit into that we don't fit into. The concept of that is, one of the things that was broken down for me by Spirit and by Ava is that the concept of God is not at all what we are taught and what we think. And the reason being is we've got a whole lot of rules and regulations about God. So basically what Spirit is doing is trying to show us and get us to listen to the fact that, I'm here, I'm the universe, I am in all, I am all. But those rules and regulations, they were yours so you could understand what that means and so that you could control people so that everybody fit in that same box.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole religious piece, the purpose of it is to provide community and loving and inclusivity. But man kind of has stepped in and made all these rules and regulations that do the exact opposite for a lot of people. Like a priest, I didn't know this at the time. My sister only told this to me a year ago. I didn't know this, and it would have totally crushed any compassion I had for the religious sector for sure. The priest who did Ava's funeral, he said to my sister of all people, "I'm not sure why everyone's so upset. Babies die all the time." Who says that at the funeral of the baby?
That's crazy.
So yeah. So, and it was really, if I had have known that then, that would have sped up my sinking a whole lot more. That's for sure. So, but now I can look at that and be like, oh, he's really stuck in the rules and he hasn't had any experiences of a profound loss where he's had to question, why do I believe this about God? Is it right? Does it resonate with me? What does that look like? Because the reality is when you start connecting, stuff gets super clear. And when it's that clear and I have such clarity and knowing in it, I don't need somebody else to validate it. When it comes to connecting with spirit for other people's children, that's a trust process and that's ongoing. Like if you ask any professional medium, they're going to tell you it's about consistency. So always, it's like a muscle. You always need to be willing to allow yourself to be open and to receive and to connect within and to connect with source, spirit, God, guidance, those things. If you don't use it and you get busy and you're like, oh, I don't have time for that today, and that just perpetuates, you lose it. And then you got to get back into it. It's just like anything, really, when you look at it as a muscle.
Yeah, totally makes sense. And
does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, no, well, I have some strong feelings around this as well. I think, there are many things that can break our existing paradigms. If we're praying for our own spiritual evolution and we're in the box because of what we were born into and what we were told, my sister committed suicide and left behind 5 children about 14 years ago. And, I have felt her presence and I have, there was something we were taught about suicide. There was something we were taught about what happens, what doesn't happen. But until you've lost someone and you have really opened yourself to learn beyond what's prescribed and beyond what's in the books, because it's your own body and it's your own soul and it's your own connection to this person. I have a whole different paradigm now about those things. And I mean, having lost people I love is one way that I've learned. Also, just like you said, just opening it up. And I think you said tapping into your guidance. It's a space of allowance that is very expansive. There's nothing about a box with it. And, when you have a set of dictates that are handed to you, that's one thing. But there's also being taught by the spirit directly in your own body, in your own being. And I do believe that God allows other spirits to teach us as well, like those we've lost. And they're like, hey, this is what's up. This is what it's like. And it doesn't come through like that. I'm just saying you could get a journal, like you could be journaling or you could be getting still, or you could have them come to your mind and you get a whole download because you happen to be receptive at that time. And you don't have a preconceived, oh, it can't be that way. This is what I was told it should be, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, this has been...
And I think...
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think for, that skepticism and that whole piece of that allowing, it's kind of like if we actually knew that everyone that ever loved us was standing behind us all the time, guiding us, cheering us on, catching our tears. If we actually knew that and really went within to experience it, we would not have the fear that we have. We would know. That's how you know. That's your internal compass. Like, imagine how that feels. knowing that your sister's right there standing beside you, cheering you on, telling you how proud she is. Like just knowing that feeling that exists is a comfort and a willingness to keep going for a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you want that? Why wouldn't you want to open to that?
And I just have to give a shout out to my dear friend, Chrissy, who lost her daughter, whose real name is Amazing. They named her Amazing. She's the 7th child and the 7th daughter in their home. And they nicknamed her Maisie, short for Amazing. And she lost her this year. Well, this podcast episode will air in 2020, but we're on the tail end of 2019 as we're recording this. And she sent me lots of Marco Polos. I've seen the tears and the snot and the sadness. I've also seen she has a real indomitable spirit. She's always smiling for the most part. Yeah. And, I want to give a shout out to her because, she is a deeply spiritual person. She gets all kinds of dreams and they are packed with symbolism. And this was going on before she lost Maisie, but in the past, she had been one of my coaching clients, and we've just, we run into each other all the time because we're in the same circles. But she has shared with me, and I've shared with her, like this soul, this amazing soul, literally, her name came through. And actually, Christy called me because she was like, she has her babies at home, and she's like, I'm not going into labor. I'm so many days overdue, what have you. And so I while she was in the later stages of her pregnancy, I talked to her and I felt this soul come through. I felt her trying to get a message. It's the same thing we're talking about. She was trying to get through to her mom saying, yes, hey, Nation, I'm coming at precisely the right time that I'm supposed to be coming. And I just felt how grand her soul was and how she was just had so much love for Christy. And that was a gift for me, but it was a gift that I could feel that. But it was more of a gift for Christy because we didn't know that this child would be born and then die, months later. And we've reflected on that together, how she was very precise in when she incarnated, even being overdue and all of that. But she ended up going into labor with her later that night that I did that session with her. But also that she was precise in when she decided to exit the earth as well. She died through SIDS, and Chrissy found her when she was checking on her after a nap, and she had passed. And so the timing, the divine timing, was for the growth of all of those who loved her. It maybe wasn't necessarily for her own soul growth because she's a baby and she didn't have a lot of things to say. But the presence she brought and the precise timing was it was a real lesson for me. I learned a lot through what Christy walked through and is still walking through, because this will be her first Christmas, without her, and having to go through that. I think you call it the tsunami of grief. I know this will air after the holidays, but I think it's still people struggle. We've got seasonal affect disorder. We've got the post-holiday blues. What would you say to someone who is really suffering? I mean, we're talking the tsunami suffering. They're in the grief. And it can happen in a lot of ways. I walked through a near divorce grief where Jeff and I almost divorced. And that was the most crushing grief that's most relevant to my mind right now. Thankfully, we're on the path of really focused reconciliation after being together 25 years. But what would you say to someone who is male or female, and they have lost somebody and they are just engulfed in misery, pain, suffering, and grief? How would you walk them through that?
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, when it comes to the holidays, the reason why it's a tsunami is because there's something missing. And that's where we go, because there is something missing. That's the reality of what's going on. And that takes us into a lot of different layers. And this is why it feels like a tsunami. It's like you can't breathe. Everything becomes, I don't know. I always feel like there really aren't any words in the human language to accurately describe what that tsunami of grief feels like when you're at the base, when you can't get up for a breath of air. But a lot of the things that, it's like I say the 24-hour rule. So oftentimes it's 48 hours, sometimes it's a week. If it's coming fast, it will go, it will subside. And it's just knowing that and being willing to sit in the wave when it hits you, knowing that you're going to come out the other side, and just acknowledging and validating how you feel. So if you don't feel like going to a family Christmas party, giving yourself permission not to. Christmas is going to come every year. And I think for a lot of us, especially in that grief, it's hard to sit at a table when it's the elephant in the room and you're sitting there thinking there's somebody missing and nobody's talking about it. So it's really about honoring your own emotions as they come up, instead of fighting them coming up, saying, I hope they don't come up. I don't want to. I want to avoid it. Actually allowing them to come up. So that's the first thing. And giving yourself permission to say no, to do what's right for you. Because in this journey, this is the time to do it. Because if you don't, things just, I don't want to say get worse, because really it can't get worse. But it feels that much worse. It feels like you're struggling that much more through it. Whereas if you just allow yourself to rock with that wave, be where you are without feeling that you shouldn't be there, it shouldn't have happened, just be in it. That is always the easiest way, is when you're not fighting that wave. The other thing I always say during the holidays, give yourself an escape plan. I always, one of my old colleagues, he deals with grief as well. And he just had this perfect thing that he came up with. When he went out after his wife died, he would have this backup escape plan in his mind that if he felt like he was on the brink of breaking down, he already knew exactly what steps he was going to take to get himself out of that situation, or be able to leave that thing without everybody being all eyes on him, or, oh my gosh, look at what he's going through. There's always, when you have a plan, you feel better able to deal with those things, especially when you don't know when that grief tsunami is going to hit. We do know holidays, you can expect it. It might be before it, might be during it, might be after it. Everybody's different. But giving yourself permission ahead of time to be able to roll with it, for a lot of people, it makes it just a little bit more doable, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. I love what you shared about if it's coming on fast, it'll pass fast. I think that could be said of any strong emotional state that comes on suddenly, because what I have found, there's outside triggers, obviously, that can trigger us just out of nowhere. Like I remember I would just, after I placed my daughter for adoption, I couldn't be around any babies at all. Like I would just get triggered at the mall or anywhere, for a long time. And then it would be something else, like a song or something or whatever. But beyond that, what I have found in my research with emotional healing and emotional facilitating through, holistic science around that, it feels like when you have a really heightened emotional sudden state change, we'll just say, and you just came out of nowhere, like you were doing fine. That's why. It's because you were kind of doing okay and your body is strengthened enough, and intelligently the body knows, okay, she just went through kind of a strengthening period. She's kind of stabilized. Okay, now let's bring up this memory. Okay, now let's bring up this emotion so she can clear it out. Because your body is on your side that way. It's trying to get out these things.
It is. You're right.
Yeah. So we take that as a bad sign, right? Like, oh my gosh, I thought I thought I was doing great. What the crap? But it's good because your body is now giving you an invitation to dive deeper and start to really get some of the last vestiges of that emotion through you and out of you.
Absolutely, Cherie. That beautifully breaks it down. And that's what I believe as well. We look at all of the bad things and what's not there and the losses. But if we are able to be, look at that challenge and say, what's the opportunity in terms of what does that actually mean of what I'm ready for, of what I'm processing, versus I don't want to go there again.
Yeah. And you will go into a fight or flight response because the body will always take you there when pain comes up. You'll either fight through it or you'll bail. And it's your chemical neurons, everything's firing in order for you to just take it on. And it's okay if you bail, it'll still come back. It's not a missed opportunity. Necessarily. It could come back in a day, an hour, a year. So this is why checking in and going within and really getting that guidance going, and God will help you. I talk about grace here and there, and I kind of drop it in when I see fit. But grace is the power. It's like an outer higher power coming in and giving you more sustenance than you currently have or know you have. And it's just that extra force, that extra power that brings you to the next place where you can work through it. And it's a gift. And it doesn't mean that you have to be worthy for it. This is where the old religious programming comes in. Like you're suicidal. You're out in the middle of a forest at 5 a.m. For all intents and purposes, if you were sitting in a church pew, they'd be like, that's bad. You shouldn't feel that way. And you're not spiritual enough if you feel this way.
Right.
But the divine through grace gave you a thought, gave another person a thought, and intervened on your behalf. And it was your daughter.
Absolutely.
She was the one that brought that. So she worked with the divine to bring you this. And now here you are, this beautiful soul who's now gifting the planet. And these are the people, I always say this, like, if you came to Earth to teach something, then you have to walk through hell in an experience. That is the qualifier. You have to live it. You have to live the hellish piece, right? I think for those of us who've been through really severe losses and things, we could have shortened the grieving time, right? We could have done that. And there's no right or wrong of how long it takes someone. But now, if I had the tools then that I have now, like if somebody would have just shown up, someone like you would have just shown up in like 25 years ago and said, Cherie, I have tools for you. I have ways that you can work through this grief of losing your daughter, and you can move forward. And I figured it out like eventually, but it would have been amazing to have the tools. So I'm just saying, like, that's what teachers we learn the hard way because we didn't have the tools necessarily when we walked through it. We maybe found our own tools.
Yes.
We defined it for ourselves. And now we have this unique offering. But the greatest gift is the compassion. Wouldn't you say that? Like, don't you feel like you just have a wellspring of compassion for women and parents who walk through losing a child that you wouldn't have had if you hadn't lived it?
Absolutely. And you are right. The greatest teachers are those who have lived through the experience and come through the other side of it. And you're right in doing it the hard way. But, I always feel so honored when I sit with somebody in the darkest place of their sorrow and their grief and their loss. I always feel just honored to be entrusted with that. And compassion is abound because, everybody's story is different, but I understand the empty well that they're sitting in. And sometimes just knowing somebody understands that is more powerful than somebody saying, oh, do this, even though I have no idea. Oh, I know how you feel. My dog died. That's not really, it really is about walking that journey to be able to get there.
Yes. Very well said. Well, Erin, this has been a real depth exploration, a deeper dive into grief. And I think what I've learned through talking with you is that it's so specific to each person. There's no barriers. There's no prescribed. There's really sometimes, you don't feel like it when it's happening, but later you'll be able to actually say, this loss was necessary for my growth and for what I had to learn in this lifetime. Was it necessary? I don't know that you could always call it a gift. That's for each person, that's a strong word for someone that's still working through that it was a gift, because they'd rather be going to all of the markers, right? Their wedding and their grandchildren. But from what I know, and I've made it a hobby of reading near-death experiences. It's just books. Like I've just gathered that since I was a teenager. I've been fascinated with it. From what I have gathered, those who've kind of crossed over and then came back have all said that, your loved ones are right there. And they also have said that it's all just about love. It's just about, those are what these great souls who only live with us for a short time, that is ultimately what they are trying to teach us, is that it is all about love. And so when we're talking about tapping into your inner guidance and being in this place of allowing and having this focused intention, if we keep it centered on the love instead of the loss, I think the healing can expedite. Is that something you would agree with?
Yes. Yeah. And that's part of why so it's interesting, because that's part of the figuring out process for me as I've gone along in this. What exactly is it that I'm doing? I'm not just giving messages from Spirit. Spirit is expediting all of the things that maybe would have taken them longer to realize, recognize, see, and shortening it and putting it right in front of them so that they can see it and shift their own perception. It empowers them. And it's really profound. Like it shocks me even.
Yes. And I'm sure you'll continue to receive more and more, because I'm sure Ava's mission with you is not finished, and what she has to show you and lead you to and teach you. Even after losing my sister to suicide, I can literally tell you there's been at least 10 different people that I am completely convinced my sister has led me to from the other side, who were either contemplating suicide or who were really in a dark place and needed to hear her story and feel it. And I feel like that's one of her missions on the other side. I feel like she's in triage with helping those people, either by alerting loved ones,
lining them up to connect.
Yes, or allowing them to connect. So it's a great work we're undertaking, isn't it? It's bigger than we think it is. It's massive. When we're in pain, we think it's just about us.
Yeah.
And we have so many generations before us, and I would say after us, who are wanting us to really feel it and connect in, so that the real work, the planetary work, can all become one. And we can do but it starts in our own body and then it moves into everything else. Well, Erin, is there any parting thoughts before, let's direct people to your website. Do you want to share that address so we can get them there and get them the tools they need?
Absolutely. So you can find me on www.thereislife.afterlosingachchild.com. It's very long. That's where you can reach me. There is a number of different resources on there, as well as information on retreats, the program where you actually learn to connect with your loved ones, and readings included in that. Cherie, I wanted to say one of the things I wanted to offer is a thank you for having me on here and being willing to talk about those things, because I feel like they're all really important and affect everybody. Is if somebody did want to go through that process of being able to connect with their loved ones for the rest of their life, that I would offer a discount as a thank you to you for your listeners.
Oh, great. And they can find that how? Just by going to that website?
Just by going to the website, going through the tabs, there'll be one that's Grieve and Release, and there is a code for it. They can just put your name, Cherie.
Oh, yay.
And Spirit thanks you, Cherie.
Thank you, Erin. This has been just lovely, and I can tell that you've walked the walk, done the talk, walked the talk. You've been through it, and now I'm sure you're going to. And one of the things you teach is how to magnify your spiritual gifts, right? What, you can take and leverage these really painful experiences into a higher way of being and stepping maybe even into a purpose around that. I know Chrissy's talked a lot about that. She feels like there's a purpose now that she has with other people who are walking through this. So that's the gift, if you were going to say is a gift. But thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm sure we'll stay in touch and continue to collaborate.
Yes, absolutely. It's my pleasure. Thank you.
What a beautiful journey she's had, learning to connect through her wounds as the portal into safety, light, spirit, and connection. When we go into isolation and darkness, sometimes that's needful. Sometimes it's part of our spiritual journey. In fact, I would say it almost always is, especially if you're on a very focused path. That's the irony of it. You have to descend. But when we come on the other side of it, we're different. We are forged, and our soul is now in the driver's seat. The truth is, you do never get over losing someone you love, whether it's through death or separation in many forms. It's that you learn to become stronger. It's not that it gets easier, it's that you get stronger. Because you are stronger, you have peace, but you never get over it, nor should you ever, because our loved ones are teachers for us in what to look at within ourselves. The letting grief move through you. It is what you do in that tsunami of grief that makes all the difference. And I hope if you are suffering with a loss or a grief of some kind, that continue to listen into our episodes because they're very empowering. The experts that I bring in have a piece to your healing, 100%. Continue to stay connected with me in standspeakshine.com, SherieBurton.com, as well as our Women Seeking Wholeness Facebook group. If you haven't downloaded my free healing mini kit, it's right on my website, SherieBurton.com, or you can go to SherieBurton.com/healing kit. Have an absolutely phenomenal week.